This is my story. This is my truth. Hey, good afternoon. My name is Christina Neptune, and we're in the month of October, but this month is an important month to me, the month of October. October is Domestic Violence Month, and I am a domestic violence survivor. I wanted to share my testimony with you all. Growing up and dealing with different relationships, there were so many things that I sought after. There was a wanting of love and wanting to feel accepted, because the love that I desired in my life wasn't present, and the kind of love that I was expecting from loved ones, they weren't able to give me the kind of love I wanted because of how they were accustomed to grow up. There was a certain type of love that they can give, and that kind of love wasn't enough for me. So I sought it out in the wrong places. I have been through several domestic violence relationships, and I have dealt with individuals, that I was dating, and I can remember definitely almost every relationship seemed to be violent. And, at one point in time, I remember consulting with my friends at the time, about certain situations that I was dealing with certain men. And you would not believe some of the things they would say. Some of them would say, "Girl, he's so fine." I would go ahead and continue with the abuse. And some would say, "Hey, some men don't really know how to express themselves, and when they do express themselves, the only way they can express themselves is to violently hit on a woman." And it was things like that allowed me to stay longer than what I was supposed to be. One relationship I can remember, I was going through a period of homelessness, and the period of homelessness that I was going through, I was moving from place to place. And as I was moving from place to place, there was a guy that I was dating, and we started seeing each other. I remember one day I caught him trying to, get with one of my friends. And I remember I tried to confront him about it, and the first thing he told me was, "Hey, your friend trying to get at me." It escalated into me and him getting into an argument. And when we got into the argument, he picked up a beer bottle and he beat it over my eye. If you can see the scar that's visible here. I do makeup, so some of it is covered up, but I had a laceration from up here to down here. And basically what happened was this opened up and folded over my eyelid. And what the doctors had told me was, had it went any deeper, I would have lost my eyesight. I remember calling the police and immediately going to the hospital as soon as that incident had taken place. And when that incident had taken place, I remember, just getting my stitches put on my eye and trying to have a warrant issued for this gentleman's arrest. And it was crazy, man. It was one of those things. I was dating this guy, and what I thought was his real name was not his real name. So, in the middle of being abused, I was now deceived the whole time. The guy that I thought I was dating, it wasn't his real name. And I was young at the time. I think I was like 19, 20. And I had, another abusive situation. There was a guy that I was dating when I was a student at Job Corps, and he was pretty mature. And I remember after Job Corps graduating, I kind of, moved on, got my own place. And I moved on, got my own place, and was just doing my thing, and just, I was happy. I was independent. I was paying rent and whatever. And I remember, me and this guy, we had, a disagreement. And when I don't want to say my response, one thing about me, I'm very strong-willed, and how, if I'm in disagreement with something, I'm going to be vocal about how I feel. And I can't remember the response I gave him, but the response I gave him didn't sit too well with him, and it ended up me getting slapped in the face and choked. So, I was one of those girls like, man, I love love. I love the feeling of love. I love being nurturing. I love being with a man, and just really putting my heart out there. But I noticed, when I was young, me putting my heart out there, it didn't accomplish nothing but me getting hurt. My next relationship was with the father of my kids. And the father of my kids, him and I had known each other since I was 19. I was 19 and he was 32 when we were hanging out. We were hanging out as friends. We were cool. And one day his brother had passed. At the time I was being that friend, and he came from an area in Miami, like everybody grieves different, but at that time everybody that was around him that was grieving, everybody was drinking, doing whatever. But him and I had started dating. The friendship ended up blossoming into something more, but him, I guess, having anger issues, not knowing how to deal with it, and me not really seeing it when we were friends. It was completely different when we were in a relationship. Me and him hanging out one night, and we were hanging out at this lounge in Miami. This lounge, we called it it was Tiny's lounge, and at the time they had like a package window where you can buy alcohol, and they had an open field where you park. You can either go inside and dance and hang out, or you can stay on the outside and hang out with your friends. And I remember that night, one of his friends' girlfriends kind of like verbally attacked me, and then made a physical threat. They made a threat against me. And the threat was they were going to take a bottle of liquor and beat it across my head. So it was a big altercation that broke out. And the altercation had got so big that, everybody that knew us was like, hey, what's going on? But it ended up being like, if me and you were dating, he didn't even take up for me. You would think that because we were dating, he would take up for me. He did not take up for me. It ended up being where he went off on me, and he took up for his friend's old lady. And I was like, hey, she threatened me. I'm like, she threatened she was gonna, do bodily harm on me. So I'm like, if she threatened me, why are you taking up for her? So as me and him are going back and forth, and I'm telling him the incident of what happened and what this woman said and what she was saying that she was gonna do, lo and behold, this man pulled out a pistol. Mind you, on the side of the street was the police department that was over that jurisdiction at the time. And he pulled out a gun. And I promise you, when he pulled out the gun, he was standing right in front of me. And he pointed the gun towards my face. And then I remember the gun, I just closed my eyes. And I remember I closed my eyes, and I was saying in my head, I was like, God. Man, I was, in my mind, I was like, God, if it's time for me to go home, if it's time for me to meet the maker, and my mind was like, man, I'm like, man, this is it. So I guess by then, while my eyes was closed, he had moved a pistol off to the side of my ear, which is my right side. And he shot the pistol on the side of my ear. And I remember feeling the wind after he shot it. And I remember exhaling. And I remember there was a person that was there that night. Her name was Misha, I think. And Misha was like, man, come on, Christina, you could come stay at my house. And she reminded me of what just happened, what just took place. And I was just like, I can't believe this man shot a gun on the side of my head. But you would think at that very moment that I would have left. I would have never came back. I came back. I came right back. And what's crazy was I was living with him. After all that happened, nobody confronted him about it. Nobody told him he was wrong. That's the crazy part about it. And I came back. And maybe months later, man, I got pregnant. And I lost that baby. And you know, the signs of him being unhealed and violent were there. But I was in that mind that maybe if I love him just enough, he's gonna change. And it didn't change. And I ended up getting pregnant again a year after I lost the first child from him. In that pregnancy, I went through hell, because in that process, he had took me through some things. He was putting me out in the streets, and I was living in people's places that were infested with rats, infested with all kind of rodents. And I was just trying to learn how to survive. I was staying at this one person's place in the city, you know, who opened their doors to me, but they were disguised as a complete enemy. Like, they slandered my name, and it was crazy. And I was sleeping in this place that, you know, the place was saturated with urine, and my skin was breaking out with rashes, and it was all kinds of stuff going on. And I remember going back to him, because I was like, man, I can't live like this anymore. Like, man, I ain't had no option. Like, it was, the living conditions were horrendous. So I went back to him, you know, after going through, because I was going through a lot, man. I was moving from place to place and whatever. And then, you know, I planned my baby shower. And then, you know, and things were good after we planned the baby shower. And I was so stressed out with all the drama that was going on with him and I ended up having my son a month early. He was due in December. He came in November, and he came like literally a week after the baby shower. And I remember having, you know, my son, and not too long after that, this man put me out again, put me out in the streets, and I was sleeping in places that were rodent infested, and having to lay on my son every night, because the size of these rodents, they look like puppies. And I remember laying on my son to protect him, to shield him, to cover him. And I remember at that moment, God had blessed me. He allowed me to get this really amazing job with the government, working with special needs children. And I got that job. And crazy thing is, I ended up going back to the kid's father. I went back because I was like, man, I want my kids to have a dad. You know, I want, you know, to work this out. And I was like, man, he's grieving his brother. We got back together. I got pregnant again. I was pregnant with my daughter. And my daughter was born 2 days before my birthday. And the kid's father pulled off the same stunt again. He kicked me out with the kids, told me to leave. And this time I came back again, but I got smarter. I came back And during this time, me and him, we weren't together. Like, I was completely done. There was no communication because by then he was doing crazy things. He was basically playing the victim. He would call police on me and have police put orders on the door to have me evicted. Not only would he have police put those orders on the door to have me evicted, every day it was a battle getting through it, and trying to find a way, to make it out. But eventually I saved my money up and I ended up getting my own place, and he didn't think that I was going to get my own place. I moved, I got my own place, and started over. And I remember God was talking to me, and God was just telling me to never ever go back. God told me no matter how hard it gets for me, to never ever return back to my children's father. I was dealing with a lot of stuff with the kid's father. The kid's father was sleeping around. He was doing a whole lot of stuff, and a whole lot of things had happened to me, dealing with him. And mentally he wasn't stable. Mentally he was very angry. Mentally there was a lot of things he was trying to deal with that I could no longer pacify, that I could no longer try and cover up anymore. I now had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and I had to make a positive influence for them to just try and get it right. And even as I'm saying this, even though that was the plan for me to make it right, I ended up getting in another relationship. And this one nearly took my life. But it started out so innocent. And you would think after I saw the signs from all my previous relationships, you would think that Christina finally caught on, that Christina finally got it right, and I didn't get it right. And my kids had to witness a lot of it. I'm sorry. In 2009-ish, 2010, there was a gentleman from high school that we went to the same high school, but we didn't know each other like that. And we were friends on Facebook, and at that time, this is when Facebook was just getting there. It wasn't where it was now. I remember transitioning from MySpace to Facebook, and the thing about Facebook is Facebook would, at the time, and it still does, will show you mutual friends, and it would show you mutual friends based on connections, based on high school. And I remember him and I connected, and we were talking on the phone, and we began to talk. And my 10-year high school reunion was slowly, it was rolling around the corner. It was really close. And I remember, me and him talking on the phone. And, I remember just at that time, after moving out and getting my own place and doing stuff on my own, I remember losing that place. And I remember God reminded me, hey, Christina, you're not going back to your kid's father's house. I don't care if his house is paid for. I don't care if he doesn't have any bills. You're not going back. I delivered you from that place. You're not going back. I ended up getting into a shelter. And I was in the shelter, and what was crazy, it was around the time of when our reunion was coming up that I was getting my life in order. And I had a really good job with the city. So it ended up being me and this guy would talk on the phone all the time, and we were getting to know each other. He no longer lived in Miami. He relocated to Central Florida. So when he relocated to Central Florida, what ended up, happening is we started seeing each other. And when we started seeing each other, it ended up being one of those things that feelings were involved. Not only feelings were involved, it ended up being a long distance thing. After I got settled in, and I was at the shelter, I ended up getting my place through a program because I was employed. So if you were employed, they had resources to help you. Me and him connected. We were taking trips. I would drive to Central Florida to come visit him, and he would come down to come see me. And, it ended up being to what I thought was a strong bond. And after time went by, we talked about living with each other. We talked about moving and me possibly relocating to where he was at. And I remember putting in my 2 weeks notice with the city of Miami. I remember just putting in my 2 weeks notice with the government job that I had. And the thing was, like, all the signs were there, because even prior to that, I remember one day there was a violent phone call with him, and he had called me out my name. He called me, he was like, "You stupid B." And immediately after he said that, he sent roses to my job. Very typical narcissistic move to do. And I forgave him because I was like, people make mistakes, and, let me forgive. But that should have been the moment where I said, you know what, Christina, don't put the 2 weeks notice in. You keep your job. But that's not what happened. I stayed and I moved. And I remember there were a few people telling me, "Christina, we think you're making a big mistake." They said, "We know the history of this guy. This guy has a very rough past of being violent with women, of being very physical." And I was like, I've never experienced that. So when I made the move, I started to really see the change in things. It was a lot of things that he was doing behind the scenes. What I thought was 2 jobs wasn't 2 jobs. He was living a double life. He had a home he was living in with the mother of his kids, and then he was living with me. There were times that he would come home, and when we just moved into our place that we shared together, we had an air mattress, and there was one moment he came home one day in the wee hours, and he stabbed the mattress. And I remember we got into a heated altercation, and the altercation had got so heated where he had excessive force on my hands and my wrists. He was trying to remove the engagement ring out off my hand forcibly, and I remember crying. And then I remember trying to run outside and call 911, and I remember he took my phone and he damaged my phone, and I remember he took my tag off of my car, and he bent the car tag so I couldn't go anywhere. And even after that situation, I still stayed. I was like, maybe if I love him just a little bit, maybe this is not like the last situations. But then the violence began to continue. A lot of verbal abuse, I was told that the only reason why men are even fond of you or even look at you because you have a body or because you have an SSA, and like that's the only reason why men gravitate to you. That's the only thing that you will be to them is a piece of. That's all he told me. And I remember just crying, and by then my self-esteem started shrinking and it started dwindling, and it got to the point where I didn't care about myself or how I looked. And there were so many things that had taken place. Like, It was times where he demanded sex on certain days, and by then I was so out of it and so just out of it. I remember one day him making accusations that I was with other men in the neighborhood, and I remember one day he came home from the wee hours of the morning, and when he got home from the wee hours of the morning, I remember he raped me. And then I remember one of my children came out. One of my children came out towards the end after it happened. And you would think after that incident had happened, you would think that I would have left already. I didn't leave. When I didn't leave, more things happened. I just remember just being so numb and feeling like there was no value, no worth in me, because the words he began to speak over me, they tried to control and make me forget my identity and who I was in God. Even after that incident happened, I didn't leave. There was another argument one day where he grabbed me by my braids and he took a razor and he shaved the back of my head. And when he shaved the back of my head, it put me in a position to where I had to cut all my hair off because I couldn't wear the braids. And then he also ripped the braids out of my scalp. So not only was the back of my head shaved, the braids were ripped out of my scalp. So eventually, I was just like, let me just cut my hair, cut it low, and start from scratch and start all over. And it didn't end from there. It ended up being where I had got my lip busted in the vehicle while he was driving. And I was dragged by a car. I got out the car one day trying to leave him, and he drove off and dragged me with the vehicle with my kids in the car. And I remember my knees being scraped. And prior to that, this is when I remember being fed up with everything that was going on. I remember a heated argument, and I was telling him I was done, I'm getting ready to go. And he called the police. And he made a fake call, and the call didn't suggest anything from what he told me. The call, I remember because the call got played back to me. I'll tell you towards the end of this story. The call got played back to me. And the call was, I heard a woman screaming, something is wrong. The police came to my home to do a well check, and I told the police that everything is okay. I'm okay. And I proceeded to close the door, and they placed their hand on the door to stop me from closing it. And I remember asking the officers, do you have a warrant or a probable cause to enter my home? And the police forcefully entered my home. I said, I'm not doing anything here but feeding my children. If you don't have any means to be here, you can leave. Moments later, after that situation, I was attacked and brutalized by 2 male officers who weighed over 200 pounds. And my 3 and 4-year-old children at the time witnessed the attack. And I had a banana in my hand to go feed my kids. I was slammed on the floor, slammed into a water heater closet. Not long after that, I was dragged by the officers in front of my kids, and they pulled out a taser in front of me and attempted to tase me in front of my kids. And I remember telling them, please do not tase me in front of my kids. And at that moment, I willingly went inside the police vehicle, and I sat there for hours. I want to say more than 5 hours, until I was transported to the police station, and they were attempting to send my kids to DCF. And once again, this man came, and he was with my kids. And I remember being in a cell and being transported. Police never read me my rights, which they were in violation of. I was stripped butt naked and left in a cell with no clothes on. I was bonded out later, and he was there waiting for me when I was bonded out. And all I could remember was that horrific moment that I went through, being brutalized by the police because of a narcissist. But the situation didn't end there. I ended up being in a fight for my life for that case. I fought that case for years. I relocated back to Miami. I filed a restraining order, and I pressed charges on him, and he was arrested. And at that moment, I had 2 people that I knew at the time. They came to come get me to come back to Miami. And I came back to Miami, and I think eventually he got out. But I went back again, and I married him. One of the stupidest things I've done in my life. I never forgave myself for that. Let me take that back. I know God forgave me, but I was hard on myself for that. That case that I was fighting for years, he ended up turning a witness, a snitch for that police department, to get me incarcerated for 10 years so my kids would be motherless. He was so conniving that he was calling the father of my kids, telling him what a good man he is, to basically form an ally with him so he can destroy me. That court case, I beat it. When I found out he turned witness, that was officially when I cut the cord of that cycle. I cut the cord of everything, because I was going through so much at that time. He was stalking me when I relocated back to South Florida. He relocated back to South Florida. He was cutting the brake lines on my tires. He was taking images and photos of me and posting them on pornography websites. He was creating fake Facebook pages with my images and posting intimate moments of him and I, and sending friend requests of family members to reveal those intimate moments to humiliate me. This man wrote a book. He wrote a stage play. He did everything he could do when he knew he had no control over me to humiliate me. He did everything in his will possible to try and diminish me and minimize me. But when I tell you, God is good. God is so good. I lived through every moment he vandalized my vehicle, stole my car. I graduated from a domestic violence shelter when he was doing what he was doing. I thrived in everything because I knew that there was a purpose and a goal for my life. I knew that God had a plan. And I knew that every detail, every mistake that I made, there was a plan behind it. And I'm so grateful that God used me in this season to be a vessel, this season and many seasons before and after and in the future. Because the things that I went through, when I tell you I should have been dead, I should have been dead. That domestic violence relationship was one of the most horrific ones I've been through in my life. I experienced emotional, mental, financial, physical, sexual abuse. It was even one point that the enemy used that man to make me feel like I was going crazy and losing my mind. By the grace of God, I'm here. I wanted to share my story with you guys. I try to share it annually. And, you know, every year I see that God has strengthened me to tell it. I remember telling the story and not being able to complete the story because tears would consume me to where I couldn't even speak. But when I say God is a healer, He is a healer. I want to encourage every individual who has survived, who is currently in an abusive relationship. I want to encourage you. You will come out of it. You will prevail. God will use you to serve other people that need help in this area. This is my story. This is my truth. This is my thorn in my flesh. And this is something that I deal with daily. And I will continue to uplift and educate other women on how to overcome and get through this. And I will continue to be a light to shine and expose this dark disease and the things and characteristics of a narcissist. This has allowed me to start my nonprofit to help other women and men and children, those who are in need. And sometimes we don't understand there are things that we go through just so other people will cross our path so we can save them. If you know anybody that's getting abused, I'm going to have all the resources, the numbers, everything in the caption section. If you want to talk to me, reach out. You want to pray, I'm going to have my Google line accessible so anybody can call or talk. You are an overcomer. I'm an overcomer. And this too shall pass. Be blessed.